This video is sponsored by Valda's Spire of Secrets, a new expansion for 5th edition D&D. More on that later. Hey Optimancers, Chris here. This is a series where I go over the spells available to Druids. The Druid spell list is one I find it's often oversimplified or underrated, so I'm hoping to highlight the great spells that are available to Druids. So far I've done analysis from everything from Druid cantrips to 4th level spells, and today I'm going to talk about 5th level spells. One thing I notice about 5th level spells for Druid is, just like with the Wizard, we see a significant increase in potential from our previous levels of spells. The 5th level Druid spell list is pretty impressive. At least their best options are, though as always we have some rotters too. The spell Cone of Cold was added to the Druid spell list as an optional class feature in Tasha's, so I will be reviewing the spell, but if you aren't using the optional class features from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, you should note this spell won't be available for your Druid. If you'd like to support this content, I have a link to my Patreon in the video description. Patrons of this channel get to see these videos early without YouTube ads, and my top level patrons can join me and play some D&D one-shots every month. Today I want to thank these top level patrons: James Sprague, James Thomas, Jad Zan, John Matera, John Cripps, Joseph Robideau, Joseph Van Horn, Joshua Samuel Apple, Justin Bennington, Caden Cripps, and Ken Livingston. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. I'm going to be ranking every spell using my standard rating system. Here's how that works. If I rank a spell as red, I think it's a bad spell, and I wouldn't recommend it for preparation on basically any Druid. If I rank a spell as orange, I think it's a very circumstantial spell. This is a spell I wouldn't recommend to prepare normally, but there are situations where it will come in handy. And if we know those situations are likely to present themselves, in those cases these spells can be very effective. If I rank a spell as purple, I think the spell is okay. They're likely not the first spells I'm personally going to prepare, or at least as my primary selections, but I do think you can get reasonable value from them if you do prepare them. If I rank a spell as green, I think it's a good spell. This is the kind of spell I would consider very strongly when choosing my spell preparations. This isn't necessarily a must-have, but if you do prepare it, you're likely going to get the chance to use it, and you should get good value from it. If I rank a spell as blue, then I think it's a fantastic spell. I would have a hard time passing up the chance to prepare a blue spell. These spells are the best of the best. If you're colorblind, I'll be adding stars to the end of each rating: 1 for red, 2 for orange, 3 for purple, 4 for green, and 5 for blue, so it should be easy to discern the color ranking. And if you're just listening, no problem. I'll be announcing each rating as well. Our first spell is Antilife's Shell. This is a one-action cast and uses your concentration. When you cast a spell, you're surrounded by a barrier extending in 10 feet in all directions. Now, something we need to keep in mind on these kinds of spells is that normally a spell targets an intersection of squares on a battle map, so a 10-foot radius is 20 feet across. Where we have a spell with a radius where a creature is the target, in this case our Druid, then the 10-foot radius means 10 feet around us in all directions, so it's actually bigger on a map. The spell lasts for up to 1 hour, so it should qualify for multiple encounters in most cases. And what the spell does is it prevents any creature that isn't undead or a construct, including your own party, from entering or reaching into the affected area. If we move to a spot where an applicable creature is forced through the barrier, it ends the spell. Now, one interesting thing here is that there's no saving throw, so creatures simply can't enter the area. It says you can cast spells, attack with ranged weapons, or reach weapons into the area, but presumably reach attacks where a creature is actually reaching into the area. So if it's like, a dragon tail or something, those are specifically prohibited by the text of the spell. There's a lot of encounters where this could pretty much make you invulnerable. Furthermore, if you could, like completely block a corridor, you could block access so that you're protecting other party members as well. There's a lot of creatures that could be severely inhibited by this. And some creatures, honestly, I don't know if they could do anything at all. Now, because this is using your concentration, this really limits what you can do while this is active. So you might want to think about some non-concentration spells to go alongside this. And it's not going to be useful in every combat encounter. In some cases, it's only going to be protection for you alone, because your party members can't be in the aura either. Though I will say it's not really clear in the spell description what happens if they're within the aura when the spell is cast. Maybe that counts as passing through it, but it doesn't say. Another thing to think about is that in some battles, this might hinder ally movement because they can't move through the area. And in some battles, this is no protection at all. So this is something you want to plan around if you're going to be using it a lot. Though, as a one-action cast, it's perfectly viable to hold on to it until you need it. Decent spell. I'm rating it purple. It would be ranked lower if it provided a saving throw, but that is the nice feature here. The next spell is Awaken. This spell requires 8 hours to cast, at which time you touch a beast or a plant up to huge size. You also expend a material component with a 1,000 gold piece value. The target needs to begin with an intelligence score of 3 or less, and after being targeted by the spell, its intelligence score changes to 10. Now, keep in mind that some beasts have a higher intelligence score than 3, so they cannot be awoken. The target also gains the ability to speak, and if it's a plant, it also gains the ability to move. Regardless of what type of beast or plant it is, it's charmed by you for 30 days unless you or your allies harm it. Once those 30 days are up, the creature may or may not be friendly to you. So I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again because I hear this when people talk about this spell. Charm does not mean you control the creature. The charm condition gives you advantage on social ability checks when dealing with the creature, and it won't harm you. That's all it does. So you have a better chance of success on these checks, so presumably you should have a decent chance to persuade it to help you out, but you're not really controlling it. Now, if you're thinking about awakening that T-Rex, and honestly, why wouldn't you? You do need to think about how you're going to cast this 8-hour spell on it without starting off your relationship by beating it unconscious, because even with the advantage on your check, you're, hey, I am sorry we attacked you and stabbed you almost to death, but we wanted someone to melee for us. That apology might not give you a new party member, even with advantage on the check. If you do cast this on a plant, the spell recommends the awaken shrub or awaken tree statistics for the creature, which are challenge rating 0 or 2 respectively. This is an okay spell. It's a big cost investment, but you can technically add multiples of creatures to your party for a time if you have the downtime and the material components to pull it off. I think this ranks purple. It's fine, but I think a lot of players assume the charm condition is absolute control, in which case this would be really good. As it is, it does okay. Our next spell is Commune with Nature. This requires a minute to cast, but you can also cast it as a ritual, which I assume you'll be doing most of the time to save the spell slot. Saving a 5th level spell slot is a pretty big deal. After casting, you get information about 3 miles of natural outdoor terrain or 300 feet of natural covered terrain, like if you're, in a cave or something. You get to choose 3 pieces of information about the area. I mean, technically up to 3, but you might as well take 3. You can ask about terrain and bodies of water, plants, minerals, or people, powerful celestials, fae, fiends, elementals, or undead, and influence from other planes of existence or buildings. So, if my druid was, say, entering a cave where there was a demon cult operating, I might ask if there's demons there, where they are, and what kind they are. That kind of information could be really useful. Technically, if I had the time, I could cast a spell again and get even more information. Maybe I want to know what kind of spells they can cast, what kinds of damage they're resistant or immune to, and maybe how many cultists are with them. Since the cultists would technically be prevalent peoples of the area, we can ask about them as well. Unlike lower level rituals like augury or divination, there's no penalty for using this more than once, though we are limited to using it in natural terrain. But in that terrain, theoretically, given enough time, we can get a crazy amount of information. So there's no question this is a good spell in the right situation. My only real question is whether the limitation of natural terrain puts this in orange territory, but there is a reasonable amount of adventuring that takes place outdoors, in caverns or in the Underdark. So I think this is worth considering preparing if you don't know what kind of terrain to expect. So I would say it's purple generally. If you know you're going to be in natural terrain, then this is a good preparation, and if you know that you aren't, then don't. Our next spell is Cone of Cold. This is a 1-action blast spell. You create a 60-foot cone, and creatures in the area make a Constitution saving throw or take 8d8 cold damage on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one. You can upcast a spell, getting an additional d8 of damage for each level of spell. Generally, I don't think that's a good deal. I wouldn't recommend it in most situations. So, as we've been discussing in the earlier videos, a Druid does have some blasting options, but they aren't really specialists at blasting, and they tend not to get the best blasting spells. Our best blast up to this point is probably Ice Storm, which does about 23 points of damage on a failed saving throw, and if we upcast it with a 5th level spell, it would do about 28 points of damage. Cone of Cold is our only 5th level blast, and it's going to average 36 damage on a failed saving throw. But it does target Constitution, so you should probably expect more creatures to save. One thing here is this is a big cone. 60 feet, so we are covering 78 squares on a grid. That's compared to 64 for Ice Storm. Though cones are harder to place, they have to originate from you, so that is a big limitation on where you can place them to get the most creatures in the cone. Cone spells are also a bit weird on a grid. If you cast the cone straight ahead, then it's as long as the range says, in this case 60 feet. But if you cast it diagonally, it's super wide, but it's shorter, at least if we follow the instructions in Xanathar's. Either way, it's going to be 78 squares total. Now, if I had my choice of any 5th level blast spell, Cone of Cold would not be my first choice. Frankly, it'd probably be Synaptic Static. But we do not get Synaptic Static as a Druid. We get Cone of Cold. And it is our best straight blast option up to this point. I mean, we are looking at a 50% damage increase from Ice Storm, so that is pretty significant. I think this gets a purple. The damage is fair, the size is pretty big, cones are more difficult to place, but we still should be able to get a fair number of enemies most of the time, and if we are concentrating on something else, this is an okay option. Now, I realize I just ranked 4 spells purple in a row, but they're all decent spells, so they're purple. I call them as I see them, but that is about to change. But first I want to tell you more about Valda's Spire of Secrets, a new expansion for 5th edition. Valda's Spire of Secrets introduces 5 new races, 10 new base classes, each with subclass options, as well as subclasses for existing classes. In fact, there's 150 new subclasses in this book. Then we get new spells, 29 pages of them. One of the cool features here is we get a new spell tag, Renaissance. These are spells that affect technology that may exist in your game. So if you use firearms, for example, there's a 2nd level spell called Jethro's Instant Reload that causes the weapon you target to reload itself for the next hour, no concentration. Oh, and for fans of previous editions of D&D, Glitter Dust is back. Glitter Dust is a 3rd level spell that prevents creatures from benefiting from being invisible, no saving throw, and can potentially blind creatures in a 15-foot cone. Plus, new options for familiars. You can get a flying book, an undead familiar, an animated rag doll or a tin soldier, a golem made of yarn. There's all kinds of creative stuff here that's fully fleshed out with artwork and full stat blocks. And a fun game you can play using 5th edition called Siege Ball. This kind of actually reminds me a little bit of the old Blood Bowl game in spirit, but the opposing teams are trying to smash a ball into the opposing team's tower to knock it down. This book is massive, nearly 400 pages. I have a link to check it out in both the video description and the first comment on this video. So now back to the spells. And the next spell we're going to talk about is Conjure Elemental. As we've seen up to now, druids are very strong summoners, and this continues with that trend. Our druid needs a minute to cast a spell, and we target an area of earth, air, fire, or water that fills a 10-foot cube. So you can't cast this on your campfire or a jug of water. It needs to be bigger than that. Once you do so, an elemental of challenge rating 5 or lower appears in an unoccupied space within 10 feet of the targeted area. We can control the elemental for up to an hour using our concentration. But if we lose our concentration, the elemental does not disappear. It stays around for the full hour, and it becomes hostile to us. As long as we maintain control, the elemental obeys our commands, rolls its own initiative in combat, and requires no action for us to direct. If we upcast a spell, the challenge rating of the elemental increases by 1 for each level. Now, technically, this is like Conjure Animals, where the DM is picking the creature. And technically speaking, the text of the spell says the challenge rating can be lower. So if you get a mean DM, they could give you a method here. Though I would generally expect that most DMs are just going to give you the standard CR5 elemental of the appropriate type. Decent DMs still might give you a Zorn or a Salamander just to mix things up, but generally I expect the DM isn't out to intentionally screw over their players. Assuming we get a standard elemental, these things are tough. Lots of hit points, lots of condition immunities and damage resistances, cool special abilities, and pretty strong attacks, though the attacks are not going to be treated as magical. In the case of a fire elemental, that doesn't matter, but most of these creatures are doing non-magical bludgeoning damage. Personally, my favorite option is the air elemental. First off, you generally won't have a problem finding 10 feet of air to cast this on. But the air elemental is pretty nasty. 90-foot fly with hover. It can't be grappled, it can't be knocked prone, and it can't be restrained. And 2 + 8 attacks for 14 average damage each. Because of their resistances, you should expect them to take half damage most of the time. So those 90 hit points go a long way. If we're given a salamander, we can actually give them magic attacks as they wield spears. So if we happen to have a magical spear that's not in use, we could hand it off to them. Though it needs to be made of metal for the salamander to get their extra fire damage, though maybe that doesn't matter all that much. As long as the DM is giving you something challenge rating appropriate, this spell is going to give you something pretty durable and tough. Upcasting this can be okay. You can get a Galabdur or an Invisible Stalker, but in terms of straight durability and damage potential, I think we're just as well off using the 5th level slot. Anyways, this is a strong summon. Really quite impactful, and it's not nearly as fragile as anything we've been able to summon up to now. The downsides here are the casting time, meaning we can't cast this in combat. The DM chooses the creature, though I expect less variation here than with most of these kinds of spells. The creature rolls its own initiative, which can make coordinating with it more difficult, and probably most importantly, losing concentration here is worse than just losing the spell. Still, I think it's green for Druid. Summoning is a good option for our concentration, and it's a pretty strong creature. It's especially useful when you need some durable frontline support. If we're concentrating on a 5th level spell, this is one of our better options. Our next spell is Contagion. This is a 1-action touch spell that doesn't use our concentration. We make a melee spell attack against our enemy, and if the attack hits, the target is poisoned, no saving throw. If we miss though, the spell is lost. At the end of each of its turns, the poison creature makes a Constitution saving throw. And if it makes the save, it doesn't really matter because it's still poisoned. Same thing on the following round. The creature actually needs to make 3 successful Constitution saves to rid itself of the poison condition. So even in the worst case scenario, they are poisoned for 3 turns. If the target fails 3 saving throws before it succeeds 3 times, then it replaces the poison condition with a disease that we pick. These diseases are nasty, way worse than the poison condition, They can cause disadvantage on wisdom saving throws on top of blindness, or throw it under a permanent confusion effect, or a stun with no saving throw every time it takes damage. Bad stuff. But if we are using this in combat, don't expect the disease. The combat's going to be over before we ever know if they were going to succeed or fail those 3 Constitution saving throws. Since Druids can now use Wild Shape to get a familiar, it is an option to have the familiar deliver this spell in combat if you don't want to get too close. Also, because you lose the spell, if you miss on that attack, you probably want to try to figure out a way to maybe get advantage. The downsides here are a lot of creatures are immune to the poison condition. If we miss, we lose the spell, and that is painful when we're talking about a 5th level spell. And considering these hefty downsides, I'm not sure the poison condition on a single target is all that amazing for a 5th level spell. This is red. I don't think the spell is useless, but it's just not potent enough, in my opinion, to recommend it. Our next spell is Control Winds. The spell is 1 action to cast, has a huge range of 300 feet, and lasts up to 1 hour using our concentration. We target a 100-foot cube of air, and we create 3 effects in that cube. All 3 effects are basically wind blowing in different directions. If we want, we can change the effect using our action, or we can halt or restart the effect using our action as well. Our first option is gusts, so the wind blows in a horizontal direction of our choice. We can also choose the strength of the wind. If you choose a calm wind, you've spent a 5th level spell slot, and it does nothing, so I don't know why we would choose that. But stronger winds can cause disadvantage on ranged attacks and cause creatures moving against the wind to have to spend double movement. So causing disadvantage on ranged attacks is something we can do with lower, and I mean significantly lower level slots. And the movement penalty here is minor. We can do much better with spells of this level. Our next option is to choose a downdraft, which also causes disadvantage on ranged attacks, but flying creatures need to make strength saving throws or fall and get knocked prone. If they don't leave the area of effect, they'll need to repeat the saving throw on every round. I know it's weird, but technically we could knock enemies out of the sky already with a tidal wave spell, and that's a 3rd level spell and doesn't use concentration. Our final option is an updraft. This halves damage from falling, so kind of like a crappy substitute for a feather fall using a 5th level slot that we can't cast as a reaction, and we can jump higher. So the problem here is none of these effects are worthy of a 5th level slot. Technically, I guess we could knock a lot of creatures out of the air with downdraft, so fair enough. If we are fighting a whole bunch of flying creatures, then this might be worth a 5th level slot. But otherwise, disadvantage on ranged attacks, slight movement penalties, higher jump distances, this is not the kinds of things we'd expect from a 5th level spell. I am going to rank this as orange, and that is because there is that case where there are a whole bunch of flying creatures within 100 feet of each other, and in that case, probably worth a slot. Our next spell is Geas. This spell takes a minute to cast, and you choose a creature within 60 feet. Creature must make a wisdom saving throw, and if they fail, they're charmed by you for 30 days. While the creature is charmed, it takes 5d10 psychic damage if it fails to follow your instructions, up to once per day. The spell can be removed with a remove curse, greater restoration, or wish spell, or the druid can end it whenever they want using their action. The spell can be upcast, and if you do so, the duration is 1 year for a 7th level slot, or permanent with the 9th level slot. Now, the minute casting time means we can't really use this in combat. I should also note that if the creature doesn't follow your commands, it's going to suffer about 18 points of damage once per day. So unless you cast this on somebody really, really weak, that's hardly unrecoverable. So we have an out of combat spell. If they save, nothing happens. If it works, it's a long duration charm with a minor aspect of control. That's an orange spell if I ever heard one. Our next spell is Greater Restoration. This is a 1-action casting touch spell that requires a 100 gold piece component, and that component is consumed every time we cast a spell. When we cast this, the target reduces their exhaustion level by 1, or it removes a charm, petrification, curse, reduction to an ability score, or reduction to their hit point maximum. Now, note it doesn't do all these things. It is one that you choose. Whenever I talk about how terrible exhaustion is, this is the evidence. This is a 5th level spell that requires a costly component, and it removes 1 level of exhaustion. That is brutal. Now, if a PC gets petrified, this is the spell you need. If a PC falls to an Intellect Devourer's intelligence drain, this is the spell you need. This spell can also completely replace the remove curse spell, and if a PC's hit point maximum is reduced, this is really important. Greater Restoration is a spell that you aren't going to need on every day. But when you do need it, you really, really need it. Though a Druid's ability to switch spell preparations with a long rest means I probably wouldn't prepare this. And then if another character does get petrified, then I would get this the next day and cast it then. So this is orange because it's quite circumstantial. I don't recommend having it prepared all the time, but it is by no means a bad spell. When the circumstance comes up where you need it, it's actually an amazing spell. I just wouldn't expect that to come up all the time. The next spell is Insect Plague. This spell requires an action to cast with a very long 300-foot range and lasts up to 10 minutes using our concentration. This creates a 20-foot radius sphere of swarming locusts, so same size as a fireball. And like fireball, it spreads around corners. The sphere stays there for the duration, and while in effect, it causes light obscurement and difficult terrain. Light obscurement, by the way, doesn't really do much. It's disadvantage on perception checks, that's it. Each creature in the area makes a constitution save, taking 4d10 piercing damage on a failed save, or half damage on a successful one. Creature also takes damage when it enters the area or ends its turn there. If we upcast a spell, it does an additional d10 damage each time it does damage. The most comparable spell, I think, to this is probably actually Wall of Fire. There's similar mechanics for when the damage is taken, except with Wall of Fire, if you enter the area, there's no saving throw for the half damage. The damage of each spell is almost the same. Wall of Fire technically does a bit more on average. Wall of Fire also hits a better saving throw, dexterity instead of constitution. Oh, and Wall of Fire is a lower level spell. Though I guess there are some advantages to Insect Plague. There's the difficult terrain thing, and the area is actually a fair bit bigger than Wall of Fire, and the maximum duration is longer. Though I'm not sure the duration is much of an advantage because the effect doesn't move, so either way, it should last the whole battle, and then after the battle, you're probably going to drop concentration anyway. My main issue with this spell is I just don't think the damage is where it should be. 22 points on average with a save for half with a 5th level spell, it's just not very good. Like I said, Wall of Fire is doing basically the same damage, even a tiny bit more. Now, if this did something else on top of that, beyond just difficult terrain, like it created heavy obscurement instead of light obscurement, I think that would have made the lower damage sting less. So this is a red spell, unfortunately. It has the makings of a decent spell, but it's just not quite there. I don't think this is a terrible spell, but again, it's just not quite good enough to recommend. Our next spell is Maelstrom. This is a one-action casting. We select a point on the ground or in the water within 120 feet, and a 30-foot radius mass of swirling 5-foot deep water appears there for the duration. And the duration is up to 1 minute using your concentration. So, first off, the area becomes difficult terrain, and any creature that starts their turn in the area makes a strength saving throw or takes 66 bludgeoning damage and is pulled 10 feet towards the center. On a successful save, they aren't pulled and they actually take no damage. So here are the good things. This is big, really big, and since it both pulls creatures towards the center and it's difficult terrain, it's not easy to get out of. The damage type here, super reliable. There are some disadvantages we need to discuss as well. The damage here is going to average out about the same as Insect Swarm, and as I mentioned with that spell, I think that's not quite high enough. The second thing is that if a creature makes their save, they take no damage. The third is, unless a creature actually starts its turn in the effect, it has no effect. So you have this weird thing here where a creature can start their turn outside the maelstrom, walk into it, and then walk out again, and there's no adverse effects. Finally, this spell has to be cast on the ground or in the water, so it's not going to work against flying creatures. And ultimately, I think the bad just outweighs the good here. Like with Insect Swarm, this has the makings of a decent spell, but frankly, there should be half damage on a successful save, and you should need to make that save if you enter the effect on any turn, and frankly, the damage should be higher too. So I'm rating this red as well. It's not a terrible spell, again, but it's just not quite where I think it should be for a 5th level spell, especially considering the other options druids have at this level. Next up, Mass Cure Wounds. So we use an action to cast this, and up to 6 creatures within a 30-foot radius sphere we create in a point up to 60 feet from us regain hit points. So basically, 6 creatures of our choice, one of which can be ourselves, unless somebody is really, really far away. The amount is 3d8 plus our wisdom modifier, so I would expect about 19 points. With 6 creatures, that's about 114 points of healing on average. But damage, it's not always spread out. In fact, it usually isn't. So you may have some party members really needing healing and others that might not be wounded at all. And this spell isn't actually really good for those kinds of situations. And 19 points of healing at level 9 isn't all that much. Our frontliners probably have somewhere between 80 and 90 hit points, so that's maybe a quarter of their total, if that. But if the party all takes damage, like let's say you're all hit with the dragon breath, then you're probably all going to take some damage. And then if you can heal 114 points with one action, that's not bad. So I don't think this is a great spell, but I do think it's passable, good enough for a purple rating. Generally, I find focused healing more beneficial in combat, but we don't have much in the way of high hit point focused healing yet, so this is kind of the option we have. The next spell is Planar Binding. Okay, so this is a hard spell to rank, and I'm probably going to need to talk about this one for a bit longer because it's more complicated than most other spells. The spell requires an hour to cast, and after we complete the casting, we select a celestial, elemental, fey, or fiend that has been within that 60 feet for the entire casting of the spell. The creature makes a charisma saving throw, and if they succeed, nothing happens and you lose the spell. If they fail, you bind them to your service for 24 hours. Either way, the spell consumes a 1,000 gold piece jewel as a material component. The bound creature has to follow your instructions, but a hostile creature is still not under your complete control, and they're going to attempt to twist the wording of your instructions when they can. If the target is a summoned creature, the duration of the summoning is extended to 24 hours or until it completes your instructions. If we upcast a spell, the duration increases. 10 days with the 6th level slot, 30 days with the 7th level slot, 180 days with an 8th level slot, and a year with the 9th level slot. Now, one thing to note is that if you cast any spell with a casting time of more than one action, you have to use your concentration, even if the spell doesn't list it. That's in the spellcasting rules in the player's handbook. So, casting the spell on any creature you've summoned is not possible, since you'll already be concentrating on that summon. But what if it's a creature someone else summoned? Well, in that case, it's iffy. I mean, the reason it's iffy is because the summoned creature needs to be in range for the entire duration of the casting, according to the text of the spell. So think about it this way. Let's say our friend the wizard summons a creature, then on our turn we start casting this spell. Well, assuming a 1 hour duration, that creature will disappear on the wizard's turn just before we complete the spell. If the wizard casts the summon right after we start casting, then the summoned creature wasn't within range the entire time. If the wizard readies their action to start casting as soon as we start casting, a readied action takes place immediately after the trigger, not at the same time, so technically that doesn't work either. There's a way to do it, but it's a little complicated. If the Druid is the one to ready their action, I think it could work. The Druid readies their action so they cast the planar binding later in the same round, right after the other summoning. Then 1 hour later, presumably the planar binding spell is completed on the Druid's turn, right before the creature vanishes. So it can be done, technically, as long as the DM agrees that the planar binding completes on the Druid's turn, not when the readied spell took place. So, one way or the other, we need DM buy-in to make this work. That the spell specifically refers to binding summoned creatures at least leads me to believe it's intended to be possible. So why is this spell so hard to rate? Well, I think the DM interpretation here is so important. If the DM provides full buy-in, you could potentially break the campaign, especially once we cast it at higher levels if we have enough gold to cast those spells. Imagine having like an army of fairly tough creatures you can command without concentration for a year. That campaign just ended. But a simple ruling from a DM that the duration of the summon expires right before completing the spell, and now you actually need to capture the creatures you want to bind, and suddenly this becomes very difficult to use. Also, in a game where you don't have a lot of gold, the casting cost here could be a big problem. There's also the interpretation of a spell's duration being extended. If I extend the duration of a 1 hour concentration spell, does it still have concentration? The spell does not say the duration is replaced. It says it's extended, and that wording makes it not entirely clear. My initial reading of this spell was that if you extended the duration of a concentration spell, it would still have concentration. Though I have changed my personal opinion on that, but obviously I can certainly understand reading it that way, and your DM might. So we have these wild things where this could be a game-breaking spell, this could be a useless spell, or anywhere in between. And so I have to tap out and rate this purple. It's potentially game-breaking, it's potentially a red spell, or potentially anywhere in between, and it depends on things that I can't possibly predict for your game. The next spell is Reincarnate. Our Druid needs an hour to cast a spell, which also expends a 1,000 gold piece material component. We touch a dead humanoid, and the spell creates a new body that the dead humanoid's soul enters if they're willing. And I find this is an interesting precedent, because it's often debated if an unconscious character can be considered willing in regards to being targeted by a spell. But you know what? If a dead character can be considered willing, you would think an unconscious character could be considered willing as well. Anyways, back to Reincarnate. The body that the dead humanoid gets as a replacement is determined by a random D100 roll from a list in the spell text. Included on the list are all the player character racial options from the player's handbook, and that's it. There's some homebrew stuff out on the web that includes other options, but officially, those are the only options on the list. The best odds are for a human body at 20%. You have a 3% chance for a tiefling. You actually have a 21% chance to come back as an elf, but that's split between the 3 subraces. Mechanically, you keep your class and level, but your race is likely to change, and you remove your old racial traits and you add your new ones. Originally, this meant changes in your ability scores, though with Tash's Customize Your Origin, maybe that could be applied here. It would be up to your DM. I suppose if we want to be thematically consistent, this body doesn't have a historical origin at all, since it's created by the spell. So the obvious comparison here is to Raise Dead, which is also a 5th level spell, though not available to druids. Raise Dead has the same casting time, the body can have been dead for the same amount of time. The main differences are that Raise Dead imposes a temporary penalty to most of your checks. You're restored to only 1 hit point. It requires a material component that's actually only half as expensive. But then there are the 2 big differences. The first big difference, you don't need the whole body for Reincarnate. So if somebody maybe was beheaded, Raise Dead isn't going to work, Reincarnate would. Secondly, and generally I find this is what kills Reincarnation as a real option for most players, is that with Raise Dead, your race doesn't change. Thing is that players are often attached to their racial choice, and some builds can actually be destroyed if the wrong race comes up. Let's say your character was a fighter with great weapon fighting and great weapon master, and then you come back as a gnome. Well, you just got disadvantaged to use the weapons you built your entire character around. Never mind likely losing points of strength. But in addition to that, players are thematically attached to their races as well. Often. Not always, but quite often they are. And they just can't see their halfling character now as a dragonborn. So as a way to bring back a dead PC, reincarnate is not ideal. Now, as a druid, we do have access to revivify, which works much better. But you need to have revivify prepared when you need it, and a spell slot of at least 3rd level available when that PC dies, or revivify isn't going to work. And in those cases where revivify doesn't work, and you have a choice between raise dead and reincarnate, I think almost any player is going to choose raise dead. And in a lot of cases, players will rather retire their character entirely than have their race changed. So reincarnate, it can still be okay on occasion, like if you're bringing back an NPC for some reason, and there can be story reasons or information reasons why this might be worth the material component. So reincarnate isn't a useless spell, but as a method to bring back PCs, it's really probably the worst option of all the spells that do that. I am going to rate this orange, because if it's your only option, it might be fine, depending on your character build, or, again, for bringing back dead NPCs. But that one feature really makes this an unattractive option for a lot of players, to the point where they would just rather not have it cast at all. Our next spell is scrying. Our druid casts a spell over 10 minutes, and it lasts for up to 10 minutes using our concentration. There's a costly component for this spell that requires 1,000 gold pieces, though it is not consumed by the spell. You choose a location you've seen before, or a creature on the same plane of existence, and if you choose a creature, it makes a wisdom saving throw that it can choose to fail if it wishes, but if the saving throw is made, this spell is lost, and it can't be cast on that same creature again for at least 24 hours. There are a number of modifiers to the saving throw. Basically, if you've never met this creature before, and you don't have any items connected to the creature, this spell is probably going to fail. If you actually have some kind of actual body part of a creature, like hair or a bit of a fingernail or something, it gets a massive -10 to its saving throw. So then this spell is really, really likely to work. Though, technically speaking, if a creature is legendary, it could still use legendary resistance. If the creature's saving throw fails, you can see and hear the creature wherever it is for the duration of the spell. If the creature can see invisible, the sensor you're viewing them from can be seen by them. The other option, though, is instead of choosing a creature, we could just choose a location. We have to have seen the location before, but if that works, you get to avoid the saving throw altogether, and you can see and hear from that location for the duration of the spell. Now, we've had a number of information gathering type spells at lower levels, and they're often rituals. So if I'm going to spend a 5th level spell slot, then it needs to get information that's really important, and it needs to be information that none of those other spells can get me. And frankly, I just wouldn't expect that regularly. Once in a while, you need to know what the NPC is up to. Maybe a big villain. And this is going to be the spell that you need. But I think there's a reasonable chance you could play through an entire campaign without needing this spell. Then again, let's say you're a moon druid, and there's maybe a wild shape form you want to use, but your DM is a stickler for you having seen the creature before. Well, you could use this spell as a way to see that creature for the first time. I think this spell rates orange. Normally I wouldn't be preparing this, but the occasion may come up where you need it. And hopefully, when those cases come up, you have a chance to take your long rest and then prepare this. Our next spell is Transmute Rock. Our druid casts a spell with one action and selects an area of stone or mud that is a 40-foot cube or smaller, and if it's mud, it turns to stone, and if it's stone, it turns to mud. This lasts indefinitely, and it doesn't use concentration, though it can be dispelled. So we'll talk about turning mud to rock first, because this is the one I wouldn't expect to come up very much. But if you have creatures wallowing in the mud, you can restrain them. Or if you needed to cross a big area of mud, this is a way you could do that. Like I said, I don't think you're going to see this come up very much. But let's talk about turning stone into mud, because stone terrain is probably the most common terrain in D&D. If you cast this on the ground, the spell's area becomes this amazing battlefield control area. Like I said, without concentration or duration. How amazing? Well, every creature in the area has their movement quartered. No saving throw, 1/4 movement. So if you could normally move 30 feet, you can now move 5 feet. So in a 40-foot cube, imagine how long it would take to get out of it. But in addition to that, any creature on the ground you turn to mud when you cast a spell makes a saving throw. If they fail their save, then they're restrained. If a creature moves into the area, they make a saving throw or they're restrained. If they end their turn in the mud, they make their saving throw or they are restrained. In order to free itself, it needs to use its action. So if we cast this on a group of enemies on the ground, if they fail their saving throws, we have advantage to pick them off, and if they make their saving throws, they can maybe move a square or two, maybe twice that if they dash, and they likely end their turn still in the mud, and they need to make another save. And if they fail their save, they need to use their action to free themselves so they can't dash. So what happens is, you cast this, the creatures that are in it, basically, unless they can fly, are going to have a hard time getting out. And that doesn't matter whether they make their save or fail their save. Now, if you cast a spell on the ceiling, instead, the mud falls and anyone underneath makes a dexterity saving throw or takes 48 bludgeoning damage, half on a successful save. Now, the way I read it, the area underneath does not suffer the effects that I described earlier, because the way it's worded, one effect if you cast it on the ground, the other effect if you cast it on the ceiling. And so 48 save for half with a 5th level slot, pretty lousy blast for the level. Though some DMs might allow the fallen mud to end up having the same effect as if you cast it on the ground, but the text of the spell doesn't support that. So what we want to use this for is going to be targeting an area of ground and getting these fantastic battlefield control effects. This is kind of like casting this giant permanent web without concentration, except that even if they make their save, they likely can't get out of the effect on their turn. Now, one of the things I hear about druids is that all their good spells require concentration, and that is a fair criticism. But at 9th level, that's no longer the case. This is one of the best battlefield control spells in the game, and that is largely because it doesn't use concentration, but also because it's as or more effective than most battlefield control spells that do have concentration. This one is blue, blue, blue. Get this, use this in combat, see how effective it is, then come back and thank me for recommending it. Next up is Tree Stride. We use an action to cast a spell, and for up to 1 minute using our concentration, we can enter a tree and then exit another tree of the same kind within 500 feet by spending 5 feet of movement to enter the initial tree and another 5 feet to exit the second tree. We can do this once per round for the duration of the spell. So when I started this series, one of the weaknesses of the Druid spell list I identified is teleportations. When we play a Druid, this is the first teleportation option we have, and it is a 5th level teleport that only affects our character. We can't take along passengers. It uses our concentration, and it requires trees of the same type to teleport between. Now, the saying goes that beggars can't be choosers, but this is just so much worse than other teleportation spells in the game. When you actually need a teleport, there's almost no chance of the right kind of trees being where you need. And frankly, if you're teleporting because you're stuck, like maybe you're grappled or restrained or both, even if there are trees exactly where you needed them, which again is extremely unlikely, then this still isn't going to help because you don't have the movement you need for this to work. This, unfortunately, is a red spell. It's maybe the worst teleportation spell in the game, and that's including 2nd level spells. Now, druids don't have other teleportation options up to this point, but really, I think I just accept that druids aren't teleportation casters, and we're not going to be teleporting. I mean, I guess when we get to 13th level, we get a decent option, but that is still a long way off. Our next spell is Wall of Stone. This is our first true wall spell, and it's honestly one of the best wall spells there is. Wall of Stone often gets overlooked, probably because Wall of Force is indestructible and available to wizards at the same level and can be cast in the middle of the air, and the wizard is likely not taking both. But this spell is often going to be just as effective, and sometimes more effective. We use our action to cast a spell, and Wall of Stone appears at a point you choose within 120 feet. The effect must somehow be supported by existing stone, at least at some point of the wall. The wall is either 6 inches thick and composed of 10 by 10 connected panels, or 3-inch thick 10 by 20 foot panels that we can arrange however we like. They don't even need to be vertical, so we can mix it up. So this isn't like a wall of fire where we either have a straight or circular wall and that's it. We can be creative with this. If we place the wall in a creature's space, then we get to choose which side of the wall they're pushed to. And there is no saving throw against that. Now, if the creature is literally surrounded by the wall, then it does get a dexterity saving throw, which, if it succeeds, it can use its reaction to move up to its speed to escape being enclosed. Each panel of the spell has an armor class of 15 and 30 hit points per inch of thickness. So the standard wall section, 180 hit points. While the bigger and thinner panels still have 90 hit points each. Now, if a section of wall is destroyed, it can cause other connected panels to collapse at the DM's discretion. I guess whatever makes sense in that situation. Spell also describes being able to use this to create bridges with supports, crenellations, battlements, and the like, as the panels can also be modified by, and I quote, crudely shaping them. And if we concentrate on the wall for 10 minutes, it becomes permanent and it can't be dispelled. So wall spells, and I mean real wall spells like this, not walls of fire or water or wind, are really useful in combat. They're fantastic battlefield control that isn't providing saving throws. Now, here they actually do get a save if we completely enclose them in the wall, and although this wall isn't indestructible, it is still really tough. And here's the thing I like about Wall of Stone. It's opaque. A lot of creatures have teleportation features, and when they do, they usually need to see their destination. Wall of Stone prevents that from happening, Wall of Force doesn't. And then there's the whole making it permanent thing. The real disadvantage of this spell compared to a spell like Wall of Force is we can't cast it in the middle of the air, and that is a big disadvantage. It needs to be supported somehow by stone, so it's mainly going to be of use against creatures on the ground. Now, as pure battlefield control, I think this is a bit more powerful than Transmute Rock, because we're actually blocking off creatures rather than just restricting their movement. But because of the concentration requirement, I think it doesn't quite match up overall, so I'm ranking it green, though I will tell you what, you can combine them. If you want to enclose a creature in the wall and it's already in the mud, then go ahead and get that reaction to move. It's not going to help you. Personally, I have a lot of experience using wall spells, and they are a personal favorite of mine. So for me, my Druid is going to get Wall of Stone. Our final spell is Wrath of Nature. We use an action and we choose a point within 120 feet, and trees, rocks, and grasses within a 60-foot cube centered on that point animate for up to 1 minute using our concentration. Grasses become difficult terrain, trees and rocks attack our enemies, and roots and vines restrain our enemies. So given the right terrain, this is pretty good. Here's the breakdown. First, it's a 60-foot cube of difficult terrain, or I guess in regards to the difficult terrain, a 60-foot square actually. Then, if an enemy is within 10 feet of any tree in the area at the start of our turn, they make a dexterity saving throw or take 46 slashing damage. At the end of each of our turns, we choose a creature on the ground in the cube, and they make a strength saving throw or they're restrained. The creature can use their action to try to escape using athletics against their spell DC, and we can have multiple creatures restrained at the same time with this. And finally, as a bonus action on each of our turns, we can make a ranged spell attack with a rock against any creature in the cube. And if we hit, they take 3d8 non-magical bludgeoning damage and make a saving throw or fall prone. So this is what we want to attempt against any flying creatures in the cube. So if we put these all together, then this is the makings of a pretty good spell. Difficult terrain plus restrain plus 2 methods of damage each round in a very big area plus potentially prone, and it is big. 60-foot cube. That is a huge area. The limitation here, I think, though, should be obvious enough. We need grasses, trees, roots or vines, and rocks in the area to get the full effect. So basically, we need a forest. And not a clearing in the forest either. I mean full-out trees forest. Now, transmute rock and wall of stone technically have terrain requirements too, but stone is pretty common. But you know what? If I was outdoors and not on large areas of stone, this is probably the battlefield control to prepare for the level. I don't think it's quite as effective a battlefield control as those other spells, but it does have the damage component. I'm rating this orange since I really think most of the time this isn't the terrain you're in. But if you are doing a forest trek, maybe switch out transmute rock for this. And that is our list for this week. Once again, some really great options here. And again, our best options are battlefield controls. And this level also really highlights the weakness of the Druid spell list, which is mobility. Next week, we're going to be back with 6th level Druid spells, so I hope you'll join me. Otherwise, until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.